We're going to 1 Samuel. And Michael talked about the first guy that Samuel got to anoint. Now, Samuel gets the privilege of anointing another person. He does get to go on a lot of cool missions because he obeyed God. So we're actually going to look at the second person he anoints. He anoints this guy named David. I'm sure you've all heard of him. Samuel goes, he anoints David. David's about 17-ish. And he said, hey, you know what, David? You're going to be king. And then Samuel leaves, and David's like, great. During the anointing process, he gets the Spirit of God, which is a huge, huge blessing, because not everybody got to have the Spirit of God. So like from a young, teenage age, David got a chance to talk with God. Oh, kind of like Samuel, actually. So, we talked about Saul. Remember, tall, angry people, Saul. So, Saul was currently the king, but he had a lot of issues going on. The Spirit of God had left him, and he was now being harassed by devil spirits. And so in 1 Samuel 16:18, we're going to see one of the ways he tried to deal with this problem. And we're also going to read how awesome this guy named David is. So, 1 Samuel 16, verse 18. Then one of the servants answered Saul, he's trying to look for a solution to his harassing devil spirit problem. Look, I have seen a son of Jesse the Bethlehemite, who is skilled in playing the harp, he's a harp player, who is a mighty man of valor. He's a man of war. He's prudent in his speech. He's handsome, and the Lord is with him. That is quite the resume. So, like, David made a name for himself, and Saul's like, all right, bring me that guy. He can play music for me. So, which makes sense. If you get a prophecy, somebody knocks on your door, it's like, I'm going to anoint you, you're going to be king. You would think the next step is you're going to move to the palace. That's what happens to David. He goes to the palace. He doesn't quite move there, but he goes and he hangs out with Saul a lot at the palace. All right, makes sense. Looks like God's plan is rolling along. Then there's this whole David kills Goliath thing, and Saul's like, no, you have to move in, you have to move in, you have to stay forever. So then David moves into the palace, and Saul's like, you just can't leave. So it kind of makes sense, you know, he's going to be next king, he's now living in the palace, and by census-wise, it looks like, all right, God's plan's working out, like that's where the next king would be, right? So 1 Samuel, still the same chapter, we're going to read verse 7. No, we're not. It's 18. 1 Samuel 18:7. So, it starts a couple problems, okay? David becomes pretty famous for killing Goliath. So, in 1 Samuel 18, verse 7, so the women sang and danced and said, Saul has slain his thousands and David his 10,000s. Then Saul was very angry. He's the king, and this other guy's getting, you know, a higher position in the songwriting. And he's mad. He's like, they've ascribed David tens of thousands and only me thousands? You know, what more could he have? The kingdom? Yes, yeah. But, so from that day on, Saul eyed David. And verse, that's as far as we're going to go. So David's like, I'm going to kill you. Alright, so he throws spears at him. He sends him on this task to go get a bunch of Philistine body parts. He's like, hopefully the Philistines will kill him. He just tries to get all these people to kill David. And David's always escaping him. David's best friend Jonathan helps him escape. David's wife helps him escape. But finally it gets so bad, David just has to book it. He has to run from his life and get out of the whole country of Israel. Go to 1 Samuel 21. So, he's on a run for his life, as, you know, some of you probably understand that, right? Where are we at? Verse 10. So, this is what happens. Just think, okay, imagine you're living in the palace, you've got a wonderful wife, you know, maybe Saul's kind of trying to kill you, but you're still pretty good, and then one day, you have to leave. You have to leave everything, like everything. Your wife, all your clothes, the life you'd been living, which was probably pretty nice because he, you know, lived in the palace. And so he has to book it, and in verse 21:10. 22. Okay. And David arose and fled that day before Saul, and went to Ashki, the king of Gath. And the servants of Ashki said to him, is this not David? the king of the land? Did they not sing this song about Saul has slain his thousands and David his 10,000s? Must have been a pretty popular song if, like, the next country over heard about it. No wonder Saul was mad. All right, verse 12. David took these words to heart. He's like, oh, that's nice. And was very much afraid of the king, though. So he changed his behavior before them, pretending madness in their hands. He pretended he was crazy. He scratched on the doors of the gate. He let saliva fall down from his beard. And when the king saw him, he said, look, you see this man you brought me? He's insane. This isn't David. Verse 15, have I need of a madman that you brought me this fellow? And he's just like, get this guy out of here. This isn't that guy. Obviously, he's a drooling, scratching mess. All right, so God gives David this promise. You're going to be king. It's looking like he's going to be king. Couple, assassination attempts. He's booking it. Now, all of a sudden, he's like in a foreign country acting crazy. 5 senses wise, that's like the opposite of becoming kings. It'd be like if you guys ended up in Mexico acting crazy. That's the opposite of becoming president. Go ahead and go to Psalms 34. Oh, keep your finger here. We're coming right back. But Psalms 34. So, David's got some options here. All right? As far as I see, he's got 2 main options. He can either be really depressed, get really in despair, think, okay, this isn't working, there's no way I'm going to be king, I just lost everything, I'm in my enemy's country, acting crazy. Or he can trust in God. He can believe that, no, that was God. That was God who told me this. He can be thankful for what he's seen God do in his life, and he can focus on that. So, spoiler alert, he does the latter. And in verse 34, or Psalms 34. Psalms 34. Okay. It says, a psalm of David. When he pretended madness before Abimelech, which is a title for the guy, this is just a situation we just read about, who drove him away and departed. So we get the cool thing of reading David's thought during this time. So we're going to see what David was thinking while he was acting like a crazy over in Gath, okay? So verse 1 says, I will bless the Lord at all times. Well, what? You're having to run for your life and act crazy. No, but he's thinking, I'm going to bless the Lord at all times. His praise will continually be in my mouth. My soul shall make its boast in the Lord. The humble shall be glad of it, or shall hear of it and be glad. Oh, magnify the Lord with me, and let us exalt his name. Verse 4, he says, I sought. That was his job, his action. He sought the Lord. And you know what? God heard him. And God's job, he delivered him from all of his fears. And you can keep reading this, I would suggest actually reading this sometime where you think you're on the right path, things are going good, and then something like bad happens or tragic happens or something. And just come back here and read Psalms 34 and think about, this is what David had to do. He went from palace life to crazy life. And I don't know how long it takes to run from Israel to Gath, but in a short amount of time. David chose to believe God. And through all this time, he's always asking God for help. And it gets worse before it gets better for him. And there's one point where he's running for his life. So he makes it out of Gath alive. And he kind of sets up a life for himself in exile. He gets a wife, gets another one. And he's got a life in exile, basically. But things are still hard for him. And we're going to go look at 1 Samuel 30. So go to 1 Samuel 30. But we're going to skip a bunch of stuff. One thing we're skipping is David is surrounded by Saul. Because Saul's continually trying to kill him. Like, for more than a couple years. Can you imagine being on the run for a couple years and, the king is trying to kill you? So he's on the run for a long time. One time he's in a city for a week just waiting on an answer from God. David wants to hear from God and wants to do what God wants to do. So much that he will sit in a besieged city for a whole week and not move until he knows exactly what God wants to do. Sometimes it's hard for me to sit for 5 minutes and wait for God to tell me what to do. David was surrounded by a bunch of people who wanted to kill him when they had weapons and still sat still for a week. Anyway, 1 Samuel 30. We're going to look at this record. 1 Samuel 30. Okay. It says, now it happened when David and his men, so this is David in exile with his men who came to hang out with him in exile, came to Ziklag on the third day, that the Amalekites had invaded the south, and Ziklag attacked and burned it with fire, and had taken captive the women and those who were there, from small and from great, and they did not kill anyone, but they carried them away and went their way. So David is out with all of his men doing a thing. These guys come, they take all their women and their stuff, and they set their houses on fire and leave. Okay, I don't know if you're having like a hard time for like a really long time, and then your house burns down, like, that's kind of defeating. Like, he's already having a hard time. Now, everything's gone again from his life. You know, he lost a wife the first time, he lost a couple more this time, and his children, and all of his stuff. So he is kind of back where he began when he had to run away. Except he's got a few guys with him. So let's keep reading, though. Let's see what David does. And David and the people who were with him lift up their voices and wept until they could have no more power to weep. They had some emotions. Make sense? I would have some emotions too. And David's two wives, see, I told you I had a couple wives, they had been taken captive. Verse 6. Now David was greatly distressed, for the people spoke of stoning him, because their souls of all the people were grieved, and every man for his sons and his daughters. So now his men want to kill him too, because they're so hurt, because they left their life to go live in exile with this guy, and then all of their families are taken away, so they're pretty angry. But look what David does. The last part of this. But David strengthened himself, or encouraged himself in other translations. He strengthened, he encouraged himself in the Lord his God. He lost everything again. And his friends were mad at him, but he went to God. He encouraged himself. He strengthens himself. You know, when we get kicked when we're down, what can we do to encourage ourselves? What can we do to strengthen ourselves? This is a question. What do you do when you need some strengthening or encouraging? Speak in tongues, that's a good one, yes.
Ben and Jerry's.
Ben and Jerry's, okay, that might work for some people. Yeah, there's music. We know that that David wrote a ton of psalms. So he wrote poems and music. He probably remembered things he knew about the people that came before him. We can read the Bible. He can reflect on God's goodness. And if you look at some of the Psalms of David, he does that. He doesn't speak in tongues, but he remembers what had happened to him. He's thankful. So then, he goes on, and in verse 8, he says, so David inquired of the Lord. He strengthened himself, and then he inquired of the Lord. That's what he did. He didn't let the hard times stop him. And that's just something I really want us to take from this, is that even if you're getting kicked when you're down, don't give up. Don't give up. God is faithful, and we see that in David's life. We see that in a lot of people's lives. And in verse 18, this is David's reward for encouraging himself and then going to ask God what to do. So David recovered all of the Amalekites had carried away, and David rescued his two wives, and nothing of theirs was lacking, either great or small, sons or daughters, spoil, or anything they had taken. David recovered all of it. He took all of it. He got every single thing back. If he would have just sat there and just done nothing, when they got that back, they would have taken them farther and farther away, and who knows what would have happened. But he didn't. He encouraged himself and went to God. This is really cool too. So check this out. So remember how David's in exile, and goes from bad to worse, and this happens. Then he gets all the stuff back, so everyone's happy again. 2 Samuel chapter 1. All right, this is really cool. Now it came to pass, after the death of Saul, when David had returned from the slaughter of the Amalekites, and David had stayed in Ziklag on the third day. Whoa, so this is like 3 days later. Because remember, he was just in Ziklag. So like right after this, he gets the news that Saul dies. And then soon after this, he becomes king of southern Israel. And then he goes on to become king of all of Israel. But he took the time in one of could have been the worst times. It was just going down and down. It was hard and hard for him. Then he loses everything a second time. But instead, he's like, nope, God is faithful. And then within 3 days, he gets this news that Saul is dead. And he gets all of his stuff back. And now he's on his way for being king. That big promise that he had gotten about 13 years earlier was finally coming to pass. Go ahead and go to Galatians 6, please. David did not give up. He encouraged himself in God, even when the circumstance looked like the opposite of God's promise. Because 5 senses wise, if you're hanging out in exile, all your stuff is taken, and your men want to stone you, doesn't look like you're going to be king anytime soon. But David believed God. He knew that it was going to happen. And because of that, he got to be king. He did not give up. And in Galatians 6, if I can get there, we read a verse that pretty much sums up that record. Galatians 6, verse 9 says, "Let us not grow weary while we are doing good, for in due season we will reap if we do not lose heart." David went through some ups and downs. You can read his emotional moments in the Psalms, but he didn't give up. He had an emotion, a sad one, an angry one, whatever, but then he went to God and they worked through it together and he didn't give up. He kept going. And in due season, he did reap. He got all of his stuff back. He even got his first wife back. And he had the opportunity to show God for about 13-ish years that he believed God. So when you're praying for something for 13 years or more, remember, think of it as a time, as an opportunity you get to show God that you believe him. That's what David did. He knew that he was going to be king. He really believed God with that. Go to Hebrews 10. Hebrews 10, not 11. Oh, I didn't go to Hebrews 11. The first one. Hebrews 10, verse 35. There's another verse that kind of sums up what we're talking about. "Therefore do not cast away your confidence." David hung on to his. Don't cast it away. Therefore do not cast away your confidence, which has great reward. For when you have need of endurance, so that after you have done the will of God, you may receive the promise. When God says something to you, when God shows you something in his word, it's true. So don't cast away your confidence. Believe it. Sometimes things take a while. Sometimes it's going to look like circumstances are working against you. That you're supposed to be king, but like I said, you're in a Mexico government building acting crazy. Like, those circumstances in your life may be not what you think should be the ones that get you on the path to that promise. But don't give up. God is absolutely going to fulfill his word. And one thing that David did is he listened to God. Every single time he went to God during those hard times, God told him what to do, and he kept going. So that's another key with David, is that he always followed God's directions. Even if he was in a walled city for 7 days waiting for an answer from God, he always went to God and he followed God, and that got him to the point of being king. Later on, he made some different life choices, but he believed God through this really hard time, and he received the reward that he believed. That's all I'm going to talk about for tonight. So,